The laughter was the cruelest sound I'd ever heard, sharper than the winter wind that rattled the old windowpanes of my house. It came from my own grandchildren, Leo and Clara, their faces illuminated by the cold blue light of their phones. They were pointing at my husband's old tool chest, the one he'd built with his own hands, its corners softened by half a century of use. "Grandma," Leo snickered, not even bothering to look up. "Are you going to be on one of those hoarder shows?" My daughter, Susan, their mother, didn't scold them. She just sighed, a long, suffering sound she perfected over the years, and ran a hand through her impeccably styled hair. "Honestly, Mother," she said, her voice tight with impatience, "we're just trying to help you. We need to clear out some of this stuff. Stuff, that's what it was to them, my life. My memories, my marriage to Arthur, all reduced to a four-letter word they saw: junk. I saw the 50 years Arthur and I had built within these walls. Every dusty trinket, a paragraph in our story, the worn patches on the floral armchair where he read the paper every morning, the chipped ceramic mug that held his pencils. A souvenir from a long ago trip to the coast we could barely afford, the faint, lingering scent of sawdust and oil that clung to the very air. But for them, my story was over, and they were just waiting to edit the final chapter and sell the book the man they'd brought with them. An appraiser named Mr. Davis was the only one who wasn't looking at me with pity or annoyance. He was a tall, thin man with glasses that made his eyes seem impossibly large and serious. Like an owl's, he moved through my cluttered living room with a strange sort of reverence, his hands clasped behind his back as if he were in a museum, not a house condemned by his client's taste. Susan had hired him to put a price on the few things she deemed potentially valuable. Before the inevitable estate sale, it was her practical way of dealing with me, of turning my past into a neat, manageable number on a spreadsheet. I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching strangers rifle through my soul. "There isn't much, I'm afraid," I said, my voice a little shaky, thinner than I wanted it to be. "My husband, Arthur, was a simple manual carpenter. We didn't have money for fine things." Susan patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt more like she was steadying a piece of wobbly furniture. "It's okay, Mom, we're not expecting to find a lost masterpiece." Her eyes, however, scanned the room with a hunter's glint, dismissing my life's collection with swift, brutal judgment. Mr. Davis ignored us both. His gaze swept over the dusty porcelain figurines my mother had left me, the tarnished silver-plated cutlery from our wedding, the worn armchair where Arthur used to sit. He barely glanced at the things Susan pointed out: a painting from a local artist, a set of crystal glasses she'd always coveted. His eyes kept drifting, searching, as if looking for a specific note in a cacophony of noise. Then they stopped. They landed on a small, plain wooden box sitting on the mantelpiece, almost hidden behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines. It was a music box Arthur had given me for our 5th anniversary. It was made of a dark, unremarkable wood with no fancy carvings or inlays. Its tune was a simple, tinkling melody I hadn't heard in years because the winding key had been lost long ago. Clara followed his gaze. "That old thing?" she scoffed. "It doesn't even work." But Mr. Davis moved toward it as if drawn by an invisible string. He picked it up with a care that made my breath catch in my throat. He turned it over and over in his gloved hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint tap, tap, tap of Leo's fingers on his phone screen, a sound that suddenly felt profane in the sacred stillness. Then Mr. Davis looked up, his magnified eyes locking onto mine. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hushed with an emotion I couldn't decipher, "I am prepared to offer you $2 million for this box." The silence that followed was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. It pressed down on us, sucking the air from the room. Leo's phone clattered to the floor. Clara's jaw was slack, her teenage cynicism wiped clean away, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Susan just stared, her face a mask of confusion, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "I'm sorry," she stammered, stepping forward as if breaking through a thick fog. "I think I misheard you. Did you say 2,000? "No," Mr. Davis said, his eyes never leaving mine. $2 million. He said the words slowly, precisely, as if each one was a precious gem he was carefully placing on a velvet cushion. He held the music box as if it were the crown of a long-lost king. My heart wasn't racing. It was doing the opposite. It felt as if it had seized in my chest, a cold, hard knot of dread. Because I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the value wasn't in the wood or the mechanics. Arthur had been a carpenter, a good one, but he wasn't a master craftsman capable of creating a multi-million-dollar piece. The value was in what the box represented, a secret, and I was suddenly terrified of what that secret was. The laughter was gone, replaced by a greedy, feverish light in my family's eyes. They were looking at the box and then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. Not as their mother or grandmother, but as the gatekeeper to a fortune. The battle for my junk had just begun, but I was no longer fighting for my memories. I was fighting for a truth I didn't even know. The drive home from that surreal afternoon was a blur of charged whispers from the front seat. Susan and her husband, Mark, who had conveniently shown up the moment he heard the number whispered down the phone line, spoke in frantic, hushed tones. Words like wire transfer, legal, capital gains, and taxes floated back to me, sharp and metallic. I sat in the back of their sleek, silent car, the music box nestled in an old showbox on my lap, its familiar weight now feeling immense, dangerous. They had insisted I come stay with them for a few days, for my safety, they said. I knew it was to keep me and the box under their watchful eyes. 2 million, Sue. Can you actually believe it? Mark's voice was giddy, a sound I hadn't heard from him since he closed the deal on their last house. We have to be smart about this. We can't let that appraiser lowball us. For all we know, it's worth 5. Or 10. I know, Susan replied, her voice still shaky, a tremor of avarice running through it. But Mom, she looked so strange, almost scared. Did you see her face? She's in shock, honey. An old woman who thinks her husband's knickknacks are worthless suddenly finds out she's a millionaire. Of course she's scared. It's a lot to process at her age. They didn't understand. It wasn't the money that scared me. It was Arthur. The man I had loved for 52 years. The man I thought I knew better than my own heart. He was a quiet man, yes. A man of simple routines and few words. Up at 6, coffee, workshop until noon, lunch, workshop until 5, dinner, newspaper, bed. A life measured in the steady rasp of a handsaw and the scent of wood shavings. I had always attributed his reticence to his humble nature, his focus on his work, the steady, reliable rhythm of his life. But as I sat there in the dark of Susan's luxury sedan, the smooth leather cold against my skin, I began to see that quietness not as simplicity, but as a vault. A locked room in the center of our marriage that I had never even known was there. And this music box was the key. That night, I couldn't sleep. Susan had put me in the guest room, a sterile, beige space that smelled of chemical potpourri and had no history. It felt like a hotel, impersonal and temporary, a holding cell with high thread count sheets. I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, the music box in my hands. The wood was smooth and dark under my fingertips. I remembered the day Arthur gave it to me. It was our 5th anniversary. We were so poor then, living in a tiny 2-room apartment that always smelled of our neighbor's cooking. He had come home from the workshop, his hands still dusty with sawdust. A shy smile on his face that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. It's not much, Ellie, he'd said, his voice a low rumble that always made me feel safe. But I wanted you to have something beautiful. I had cried. Not because it was simple, but because I knew he must have saved for months, skipping his lunchtime sandwich, to buy even the materials for it. He told me he'd found a special piece of rosewood, dense and dark. He'd crafted it himself, he'd said. But now, running my fingers over the seamless joints, the impossible perfection of the corners, I felt a flicker of doubt. Arthur was a good carpenter, a wonderful one. He could build a sturdy cabinet, a beautiful chair. But this was flawless. Perfect. It felt like the work of a watchmaker, not a woodworker. It was beyond his skill. He'd said the melody was an old folk song from his hometown, a place he never, ever spoke of. Just a little town back east, he'd say, waving a dismissive hand if I asked. Nothing to tell. I had accepted that. In those days, people didn't dissect their past the way they do now. You looked forward. But had his silence been a shield? A wall built to hide something? I turned the box over in the dim light from the hallway. And then I saw them. On the bottom, so faint I'd never noticed them before, almost lost in the dark grain of the wood, were two initials and a symbol, intricately carved, LV. My blood ran cold. My husband's initials were AJM Arthur John Miller, who was LVE. The name, the possibility, felt like a betrayal. A strange woman's mark on the most intimate gift he had ever given me the next morning. The atmosphere in Susan's house was thick with a new, cloying sweetness. Leo, who usually wouldn't give me the time of day unless he wanted money, brought me a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling, Grandma?" he asked. His eyes flicking to the showbox on my nightstand. Clara offered to brush my hair. Her touch clumsy and unfamiliar, it was a grotesque pantomime of affection, and it made my stomach turn. They weren't seeing me, Eleanor, they were seeing a winning lottery ticket with wrinkles. Susan and Mark sat me down at their granite kitchen island after a breakfast I couldn't eat. They had spreadsheets printed out, columns of numbers marching across the pages. "Mom," Susan began, her voice oozing with a practiced reason she usually reserved for difficult clients. "Mark and I have been doing some research. Mr. Davis works for a very prestigious international firm, a private acquisitions group. They don't make offers like that lightly. This is real, but we need a plan." "A plan for what?" I asked, my voice flat. Mark leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing light. "A plan for the money, Eleanor. This could change everything. The kids' college funds, paid in full. We could get that lake house. We could set up a trust for you. Top-of-the-line care, anything you need. We could all be set for life." "It was my husband's," I said softly, my hand resting protectively on the showbox. "It's my box." Of course," Susan said quickly, a flash of irritation crossing her face before being smoothed over. "But you don't want to be burdened with all this, do you? The legalities, the investments. It's overwhelming. Let us handle it. We'll make sure you're taken care of. We just need you to agree to the sale." They saw a transaction. I saw a betrayal. A betrayal of Arthur, and now a betrayal of me. They wanted to sell a piece of my husband's soul without ever bothering to ask what it meant. "I need to think," I said, standing up, my knees feeling weak. "I need to go home." "Mom, that's not a good idea," Susan started, her sweet facade cracking. "The house isn't secure. What if someone finds out about the box? A burglar?" "What you mean is, what if I get out of your sight?" I looked her straight in the eye. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something other than impatience in her gaze. It was fear. Raw fear of losing control of the situation. That's when I knew I had to get back to my house, to Arthur's workshop. The answers weren't in their spreadsheets or their talk of trusts. They were in the dust and the memories they so desperately wanted to erase. Subscribe now, you won't believe the twist that's coming. Back in my own house, the silence was a comfort, a balm on my frayed nerves. I made my way to the small, detached workshop in the backyard, a place Susan hadn't bothered to have Mr. Davis inspect because it was filled with greasy tools and scraps. It smelled of sawdust and turpentine and time, the scent of my husband. It was cluttered, chaotic, but it was an organized chaos that only Arthur had understood. His tools hung on the pegboard walls in a precise order, their shadows drawn around them in faded marker. Stacks of wood leaned in the corner, sorted by type and grain. His old leather apron was slung over a chair, still bearing the faint imprint of his body. It was like walking into his heart. I didn't know what I was looking for. A clue. A sign. Something to explain the initials LVE. I started going through his old workbench, the drawers filled with screws, nails, and bits of sandpaper. In the bottom drawer, beneath a pile of old, oil-stained rags, my fingers hit a thin piece of wood that didn't feel right. It moved under my touch, a false bottom. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pried it open with an old chisel. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal and a stack of yellowed letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. My hands trembled as I opened the journal. The handwriting was Arthur's, but it was the script of a young man, more fluid and confident than the cramped, careful writing of his later years. The first entry was dated 60 years ago. October 12th. "I leave tonight. I cannot do it. I cannot become him." Father's ultimatum was clear. Marry Isabel Van Etten and join the family business. Or be cut off entirely, my name stricken from the records. He sees it as a merger of dynasties. Not a marriage. I see it as a prison sentence. Isabel is a fine woman, I suppose, but she is part of his world, a world of secrets and deals made in smoky rooms, a world built on a foundation I'm no longer sure is clean. I will not be a part of it. I am taking only what I can carry and the skills I learned in the woodshop as a boy. the only honest thing in that house. I will become a new man, a simple man, a good man. I hope. My mind reeled. Family business? Dynasties? Arthur had told me he was an orphan, that his parents died in a house fire when he was a teenager. It was the bedrock of his story. The reason he was alone. The reason he cherished the family we built so fiercely. Had it all been a lie? I untied the brittle ribbon on the letters. They were on heavy, cream-colored paper, embossed with a crest I didn't recognize, a stylized eagle with its wings outstretched over a letter E. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, and filled with a mother's pain. They were all signed. With all my love. Mother. The first one began. My dearest Arthur, I pray this letter finds you well and that my channels for reaching you are as secret as I hope your father is furious. Of course he has disowned you publicly. He speaks of you as if you are dead, but you must know. In my heart, you will always be my son. I know why you left. You have a conscience. Something your father traded for power long ago. I have enclosed a small amount of cash. It's all I could manage without him knowing. Please. Be safe and never forget who you are, even if you must hide it from the world. Another letter, dated a year later, after he had met me. I worry for you constantly. This life you have chosen, this Arthur Miller. It is so far from what you were born to. But perhaps it is better pure. I met your Eleanor once, you know. Forgive my intrusion. I followed you. I saw you with her in the park. She has a kind laugh. She looks at you as if you are the sun. She does not know, does she? I understand why the truth of our family is a heavy burden. I have sent you a small gift for your anniversary. Through my most trusted manual, a music box. It is from my own family line. A small heirloom LV Lillian von Eisenberg, a reminder of your mother. It will not look like much to an unknowing eye, but it is a symbol of our lineage. Perhaps one day, it will serve a greater purpose. For now, let it be a reminder of a mother who loves you. Even from afar. Lillian von Eisenberg LV. It wasn't a strange woman's initials, it was his mother's. My simple, humble Arthur was a von Eisenberg. The name hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard it before. Read it in the financial pages. Arthur always ignored the Eisenberg Corporation. They were titans of industry. A name synonymous with old money and ruthless power. They owned shipping lines, banks, vast tracts of land. They were practically American royalty, and my Arthur, my quiet carpenter, had walked away from it all. For me, our poverty hadn't been his circumstance. It had been his choice, his sacrifice. He had chosen a life of calloused hands and sawdust so he could have a life of love and honesty with me. The weight of it crushed me. For 50 years, he had carried this colossal secret, protecting me from a truth he thought would poison our lives. Just as I was processing this impossible revelation, I heard a car door slam outside, loud and intrusive. Susan and Mark. They had followed me. I quickly hid the journal and letters back in the workbench, my mind racing. They couldn't know. Not yet. Not like this. They would see it only as a path to more money, a claim to an empire. They wouldn't understand the sacrifice. I had to protect Arthur's legacy from their greed. I had to understand the greater purpose his mother had written of. The music box wasn't just a memento, it was a message. And I was the only one left to read it. The workshop door creaked open, and Susan stood there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. Her face was a storm of frustration and suspicion. Mom? What are you doing in here? I told you it wasn't safe to be alone. I'm just remembering your father, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I forced myself to look at the familiar clutter, the tools, the wood shavings on the floor, the life he chose. This was his sanctuary. Mark pushed past her, his gaze sweeping the small space with a new, avaricious intensity. Any other priceless antiques hidden in here? Eleanor? He asked, a joking tone that didn't hide his seriousness. Maybe a Fabergé egg hiding in a can of nails? Stop it, Mark, Susan snapped, though her own eyes were doing the same forensic sweep. They saw the workshop as another pile of junk to be sifted for gold. They couldn't see the ghost of Arthur standing in the corner, his heart breaking. I'm tired, I said, pushing myself up from the stool. I think I'll go lie down. I walked past them out of the workshop, feeling their suspicious eyes on my back. I knew I was running out of time. They were getting more aggressive, their patience worn thin by the tantalizing promise of wealth. They had scheduled another meeting with Mr. Davis for the next day at their house. They called it a family meeting to discuss the next steps. I knew it was an ambush. They were going to corner me, pressure me, and force my hand. That night, back in the sterile guest room at Susan's, I took out the music box again. I looked at it with new eyes. It will not look like much to an unknowing eye, but it is a symbol of our lineage. Perhaps one day it will serve a greater purpose. Arthur's mother's words echoed in my mind. What purpose? I ran my fingers over every inch of the smooth wood, pressing, tapping, searching for a hidden catch or a loose panel. Nothing. I thought about the melody. The one Arthur said was a folk song. What if it wasn't just a song? What if it was a code? But the winding key was lost. I remembered him telling me he'd misplaced it not long after he gave the box to me. Sighing that he was getting clumsy now, I wondered if he had lost it on purpose to keep the box silent, to keep the secret locked away forever. Desperation gnawed at me. I needed to open it. Not for the money, but for him. To understand the full weight of the life he'd given up. I thought back, sifting through 50 years of memories, trying to remember everything about the box. He would wind it up, and it would play its little tune. But there was something else. I remembered one time, years ago, Clara, as a small child, had been playing with it. She dropped it on the rug, and a tiny, almost invisible drawer had popped out of the base. It was empty. Arthur had rushed over, a look of sheer panic on his face, and quickly pushed it shut. He'd scolded her, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it, telling her it was very delicate and not a toy. At the time, I thought he was just worried she'd break his gift to me. Now I knew he was terrified she'd stumbled upon his secret. The drawer. How did it open? It wasn't a catch. I looked at the box again. There were no visible seams. It must be something else. The melody. Even without the key, maybe there was a way. I remembered the tune vividly, a simple, haunting refrain of 8 notes. On the top of the box, almost blending in with the grain of the wood, were 8 tiny, almost imperceptible knots in the wood, arranged in a circle. I'd always thought they were natural imperfections. They weren't. They were buttons. My breath hitched. My fingers, gnarled with age, trembled as I pressed the knots in the sequence of the melody. Do, re, mi, so, fa, do, ti, do. I pressed the first knot, nothing. The second, the third, I went through the whole sequence, still nothing. My hope began to drain away. Maybe I was just an old woman seeing patterns where there were none. My mind addled by grief and shock. Then I remembered Arthur's hands, a carpenter's hand, strong, calloused, but incredibly precise. He was left-handed. He did everything backwards from how I did it. He saw the world from a different angle. I looked at the sequence of notes again. What if I played it in reverse? My finger hovered over the last knot in the sequence and pressed, then the second to last. I worked my way backward through the melody. After I pressed the final knot, the first note of the song, I heard a soft click. A tiny, seamless drawer, no bigger than a matchbox, slid open from the base. It was the one Clara had accidentally opened all those years ago, but this time, it wasn't empty inside. Nestled on a bed of faded velvet was not a jewel or a gold coin. It was a small, intricately carved silver key, the winding key. With trembling hands, I picked it up and fitted it into the small hole in the back of the box. I turned it slowly, the winding mechanism clicking softly, a ghost sound I hadn't heard in decades. I set the box down on the bedspread, and then it began to play. The melody filled the sterile room, sweet and clear and heartbreakingly familiar. It was the sound of my life with Arthur, the sound of our quiet love, but I knew now it was also the sound of his secret. As the last note faded into the silent room, there was another, louder click from inside the box. I watched, mesmerized, as a section of the floor of the box, right in the center, rose up on a tiny, silent hinge, revealing a hidden compartment. This was the real secret. This was what Arthur had been guarding his entire life. Inside were 2 items. One was a folded, brittle piece of parchment, yellowed with age. The other was a single sheet of stationery, the same cream-colored paper as his mother's letters, bearing the same eagle crest. I carefully unfolded the letter first. It was from his mother, Lillian, but this one was different. It wasn't filled with loving pleasantries. It was a confession, dated shortly after the first letter she sent. To whomever finds this, if you are reading this, it means my son, Arthur, has either chosen to reveal this truth, or it has been discovered after his death. I can no longer live with the lie that has been the foundation of our family's fortune. My husband, Heinrich von Eisenberg, built his empire on a crime, the vast tracts of timberland in the Northwest that became Eisenberg lumber. The cornerstone of his wealth were not purchased, they were stolen. The land belonged to the Miller family. Hardworking German immigrants who were cheated with a fraudulent deed and then violently driven from their home when they protested. Heinrich ruined them. He erased them. I discovered this truth years into our marriage, and it has haunted me ever since. I have no power to defy my husband, but I cannot let this sin go unpunished into eternity. The document hidden with this letter is the original true deed to the land, which I found locked in my husband's safe. It proves the Miller family's ownership. My son, Arthur, fell in love with a woman named Eleanor Miller when he told me her name. In one of his rare letters, I felt it was a sign from God, a chance for cosmic justice. I do not know if she is related to the family we wronged, but the name itself is a judgment upon us. Arthur knows nothing of this specific crime. He only knows his father is a cruel manual. I give him this box, this key to the truth, in the hopes that he, with his good heart, will one day do what I am too cowardly to do: right this wrong, restore what was stolen. Forgive me, Lillian von Eisenberg. I dropped the letter as if it had burned my fingers. Miller, my maiden name was Miller. My father was an orphan, raised in a church home in Oregon. With no knowledge of his parents, I told him his family had been poor farmers who lost everything in a land dispute. They hadn't just lost it, it had been stolen by the family of the man I married. Arthur hadn't just run away from wealth and a loveless marriage. He had unknowingly run straight into the arms of the truth. He fell in love with the descendant of the very family his own father had destroyed. I tried to imagine his discovery, the moment he must have found this letter, perhaps years into our marriage. The horror, the crushing, impossible weight of it. He loved me. He loved me so much that he chose to bury the secret. He couldn't bear to tell me that the blood in his veins was the same that had caused my family's ruin. And he couldn't bear to use the deed to claim the fortune back, because it would mean revealing the monstrous truth of his origins. So he lived his life in a quiet, noble penance. He became a simple carpenter, working with the very wood his father had stolen, as if trying to atone for the sin with his own two hands, one plank at a time. Our entire life together, which I had seen as a simple love story, was in fact an epic tragedy of sacrifice and silent atonement. The $2 million offer from Mr. Davis was suddenly crystal clear. It wasn't an offer for a piece of art. It was hush money. The Eisenberg Corporation must have known about the box, about the secret it held. They were trying to buy back the evidence of their foundational crime. My grief for Arthur was so profound it felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I wasn't just mourning his death anymore. I was mourning the silent, secret burden he had carried alone for 52 years. The junk in my house wasn't junk. It was the carefully curated evidence of a life lived with honor in the face of an impossible truth. And my daughter, his daughter, was about to sell that honor for cash. I knew what I had to do. The family meeting was even worse than I had imagined. It was held in Susan and Mark's cavernous living room, which felt more like a corporate boardroom than a home. Mr. Davis was there, looking impeccably professional in a tailored suit, a leather briefcase resting by his chair. Susan and Mark sat on a stark white sofa opposite me, their faces arranged in masks of serious concern. Leo and Clara hovered in the doorway, pretending to be uninterested but radiating an anxious energy. "Mom," Susan began, leaning forward, her voice a carefully modulated tool. "We're so glad you agreed to talk this through. Mr. Davis has the official offer paperwork ready. It's very generous." Mr. Davis opened his briefcase. "Indeed, Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "My clients are very motivated. They have a deep appreciation for historical artifacts with a unique provenance." "What is the provenance, Mr. Davis?" I asked, my voice clear and cold. He blinked, momentarily thrown. "Well, that is a confidential matter. What matters is the value they are placing on it." "It matters to me," I said. I looked at Susan, at Mark. "It should matter to you, too. This isn't just a piece of wood. It belonged to your father." Mark scoffed, a sound of pure condescension. "Eleanor, with all due respect, Dad was a carpenter. He probably bought it at a flea market. It's a lucky fluke, that's all. We need to sign the papers before these clients change their minds." He slid a pen and a thick document across the coffee table toward me. This was it. The moment of truth. I took a deep breath and placed the music box on the table between us. Then, next to it, I laid Arthur's mother's confession. And next to that, the original, brittle deed to the Miller family land. "My husband did not buy this at a flea market," I said, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. It was a gift from his mother. His real name was not Arthur Miller. It was Arthur von Eisenberg. The name hung in the air, a grenade with a pin pulled. Mark's jaw dropped. Susan stared, her face draining of all color. Mr. Davis's professional mask finally slipped, his eyes widening in alarm. His father, Heinrich von Eisenberg, built his fortune by stealing the land this deed represents, I continued, my gaze locked on my daughter. He stole it from a family named Miller. My family. Your family, Susan. I let the words sink in. Susan's hand went to her mouth, a choked sob escaping her lips. All her life, she had resented our poverty. She resented her father for being a simple man who couldn't give her the things her friends had. She saw my love for him, my fierce protection of his memory and our simple life, as a weakness, a refusal to move on. Now, in a single, devastating moment, she saw the truth. Her father wasn't a failure. He was a prince who had given up a kingdom to protect her, to protect me, from the poison of his own family's legacy. He had lived a life of quiet, humble labor as penance for a sin that wasn't even his. The $2 million, I said, turning my eyes to the horrified Mr. Davis. It's not an offer by a music box, is it? It's an offer from the Eisenberg Corporation to buy this deed, this confession. To buy my silence. To bury their crime for good. Mr. Davis was speechless. He could only nod, a single, sharp dip of his head. Susan was openly weeping now. Not the frustrated tears I was used to, but deep, racking sobs of shame and revelation. Oh, Daddy, she whispered, the word a child's cry. I never knew. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a lifetime of misunderstanding, begging for an absolution I wasn't sure I could give. Mom, I'm so sorry. I just thought you were holding on to junk. I didn't know you were holding on to his honor. I reached across the table and took my daughter's hand. For the first time, it didn't feel like a gesture of control or pity. It felt like a connection, fragile and new. He protected us, Susan. It was his greatest gift. Then I looked at Mr. Davis. You can tell your clients, the Eisenberg Corporation, that their offer is refused. I picked up the deed, the fragile paper feeling as strong as steel in my hand. This land is not for sale. It's for return. I will find the other descendants of the Miller family, the ones my father never knew he had. We will reclaim what is ours. Not the money, the legacy, the truth. My collapse came later that night, in the quiet of my own home, in the worn armchair where Arthur used to sit. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a grief so immense and a love so profound that they brought me to my knees. I wept for the man who carried the world on his shoulders so that mine could be light. I wept for the 52 years of secrets he kept out of love. I wept for the daughter who finally understood the richness of the life she had always seen as poor. In the end, it wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. The great treasure of my life wasn't a multi-million-dollar music box. It was the love of a man who chose honor over wealth, truth over legacy, and me over everything. Susan, Mark, and the children are helping me now. Not to clear out the junk, but to archive it. To piece together the story of the quiet carpenter who was secretly a king. We are a family again, bonded not by the promise of a fortune, but by the weight of a beautiful, heartbreaking truth. The music box sits on my mantelpiece, silent now. Its secret is out, its purpose fulfilled. It's just a plain wooden box again, a gift from a husband to his wife. And it is the most valuable thing I own. Comment which part of the story left you speechless.